probably spent 20 minutes answering questions about whether you prefer parties or books. And at the end, a colorful graphic told you that you're an architect or a mediator. It feels good, doesn't it? It feels like someone finally handed you the manual to your own soul. I remember sitting in my room, scrolling through these results, feeling a strange sense of relief. Finally, a label that explained why I felt out of place or why I reacted the way I did. But there's a quiet danger in those labels. They turn your personality into a box. They suggest that you are a finished product, a static type that fits into a neat category. The truth is, those quizzes are often closer to horoscopes than they are to actual science. They give us what we want, certainty, but they hide what we actually need, the truth about how we function. If you've ever felt like you didn't quite fit your type, or if you've acted like a different person depending on the day, it's not because the test was wrong. It's because types don't actually exist in the human brain. In psychology, we talk about the difference between typology and traits. Most viral quizzes use typology, putting you into a bucket like an introvert or a thinker. The problem is the Barnum effect, a psychological phenomenon where we see ourselves in vague, positive descriptions. If a test says you are deeply intuitive but sometimes misunderstood, your brain screams, "That's me!" But that description fits almost everyone, which makes it scientifically useless for prediction. Binary tests also fail the test of reliability. If you take them twice, you often get two different results. Human personality doesn't work in either-or categories. It works on a normal distribution, or a bell curve. Most people aren't 100% extroverted or 100% introverted. They sit somewhere in the messy middle. The Big Five model, Ocean, is different because it measures your position on 5 continuous spectrums. It doesn't tell you what you are, it measures how much of a specific biological tendency you possess. This allows for predictive validity, meaning we can actually use these scores to forecast life outcomes. From your career success to your likelihood of divorce, these 5 traits are the underlying hardware of your life. I remember a period in my life where I felt like a different person every single Tuesday. One morning, I'd wake up feeling incredibly social, ready to lead a meeting and grab drinks after. By the afternoon, the very idea of talking to another human being felt physically exhausting. I'd go back to those online quizzes, desperate to find the one that finally clicked. I wanted a label that would stay still, something that would stop the shifting sand under my feet. But the more I looked for a type, the more frustrated I became with my own inconsistency. I felt like I was failing at being myself because I couldn't stick to the script the test gave me. Maybe you felt that too. That strange guilt when you don't act like the introvert you're supposed to be. It turns out the problem wasn't my personality, it was the map I was using to navigate it. I was looking for a destination, but personality is actually a set of coordinates.
The Big Five didn't come from a single guru or a clever marketing team. It emerged from something called the Lexical Hypothesis. Psychologists theorized that if a personality trait is important, we've already invented a word for it. They took every single adjective in the dictionary, thousands of them, and ran them through factor analysis. This is a statistical method that looks for clusters of words that always seem to go together. If you describe yourself as talkative, you are statistically likely to also be assertive and energetic. Researchers found that almost every human trait boils down to 5 fundamental dimensions. These are openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Unlike types, these traits are heritable, meaning about 40 to 50% of your scores come from your DNA. They are the biological settings of your nervous system, determining how you filter the world.
Have you ever walked into a room and felt like the walls were just a little too close? Maybe you're the person who can't help but ask, why? Until everyone else is tired of hearing it. I remember standing in a museum once, staring at a piece of modern art that was just a blue square. Most people walked past it with a shrug or a smirk, but I couldn't move my feet. I was trying to feel the texture, the intent, the sheer audacity of the artist. That's the explorer's tax, the constant need to find meaning in things that others find mundane. It can be lonely because you're often the only one in the room who wants to talk about the what if. You might have been called scatterbrained or unfocused because you have 10 hobbies you love. But that's not a lack of focus. It's a biological hunger for the new and the strange. Openness to experience is the most misunderstood trait because it's not about being open-minded in a political sense. It's about cognitive flexibility, how easily your brain creates new neural pathways. High openness is linked to latent inhibition, which is your brain's ability to filter out useless data. Most people see a chair and just see a chair. But someone high in openness sees the wood grain, the history of the design, and the shadow it casts. Their filter is leaky, letting in more information, which is why this trait is highly correlated with creativity and IQ. On the low end, you have preservation. These individuals value tradition, routine, and the tried and true. They are the anchors of society, ensuring that we don't throw away systems that actually work. Neither end of the spectrum is better. One explores the frontier, while the other maintains the home.
I remember watching a friend of mine prepare for a simple weekend camping trip. They didn't just pack a bag, they created a spreadsheet with categories for calories and weight. They spent 3 hours cleaning the stove before it even touched the trunk of the car. I used to think that was just being uptight or maybe a bit of a personality quirk. But then I saw them in a crisis, when the tent pole snapped and the rain started pouring. With everyone else was panicking, they were already reaching for the duct tape they'd packed. That's the internal drive of the conscientious person, the need to impose order on a chaotic world. It's the voice in your head that won't let you sleep until the kitchen counters are wiped down. It's not just being a hard worker. It's a fundamental orientation toward the future.
Conscientiousness is the best predictor of long-term life success, including health and wealth. It is broken down into 2 main subtraits: industriousness and orderliness. Industriousness is your ability to stay on a task despite the temptation of a distraction. Orderliness is your preference for structure, schedules, and clean environments. Biologically, this trait is linked to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function. People high in this trait have a higher capacity for delayed gratification, the marshmallow test of the soul. They can sacrifice a small win today for a massive win 5 years from now. On the low end, you have spontaneity. These individuals are flexible and adapt quickly to change. However, they often struggle with attention residue, where unfinished tasks drain their mental energy.
Have you ever noticed how some people seem to catch fire in a crowded room? I have a friend who can walk into a party exhausted and leave 4 hours later with more energy than when he started. I used to watch him and think it was a performance, a mask he put on to impress people. But then I realized he wasn't performing at all. He was literally recharging. On the other hand, I've spent nights where 1 hour of small talk felt like running a marathon in the sand. It's that moment when you're staring at the exit sign, calculating exactly how soon you can leave without being rude. We often frame this as shyness versus confidence, but that's a complete misunderstanding of the trait. Shyness is a fear of social judgment. Extraversion is simply a preference for stimulation. It's the difference between wanting to turn the volume of life up or wanting to tone it down.
At its core, extraversion is about your brain's reward sensitivity system. It is primarily regulated by dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and pleasure. Research suggests that extroverts have a higher threshold for stimulation. They need more input to feel a reward. A quiet room feels understimulating to them, almost like sensory deprivation, which drives them toward action and people. Introverts, conversely, have a much more sensitive system. They reach their peak reward state much faster. Once they hit that peak, any additional stimulation, like loud music or crowded bars, becomes noise and causes fatigue. This is why extraversion is highly correlated with positive emotion. It's the tendency to seek out and enjoy rewards. High scorers are often assertive and cheerful, while low scorers are reserved and independent. Neither is broken. One is a high-gain amplifier, and the other is a high-fidelity receiver. Have you ever sat through a movie you hated just because your friend really wanted to see it? Or maybe you found yourself apologizing to a waiter when they brought you the wrong order. I remember a meeting where I had a better idea, one that would have saved the company thousands. But I looked at the manager's face, saw his excitement for his own plan, and I just stayed quiet. I didn't want to break the vibe. I didn't want to be the friction in the room. That's the peacekeeper's burden, the physical discomfort that comes from interpersonal conflict. It's an incredible gift for building teams and keeping families together. But it can also feel like you're a background character in your own life. You become so good at reading what others need that you forget to check what you need. Agreeableness is the dimension of interpersonal orientation. It is underpinned by the brain's empathy circuitry and the hormone oxytocin. High scorers are characterized by politeness and compassion. They prioritize the group's harmony over their own interests. Interestingly, research shows a negative correlation between agreeableness and income, particularly for men. This is often called the agreeableness trap. Because high scorers dislike conflict, they are less likely to negotiate for raises or push back on bad ideas. On the low end, we have disagreeableness. These individuals aren't necessarily jerks. They are simply conflict agnostic. They care more about the truth or the result than they do about people's feelings. A disagreeable person is the one who tells you your business plan won't work before you lose your life savings. We need both. The agreeable person to hold the tribe together, and the disagreeable person to tell the tribe when they're walking off a cliff. Have you ever been lying in bed, perfectly safe, and suddenly your heart starts racing? You start thinking about a conversation you had 3 years ago and how you sounded weird. Or you find yourself checking the stove 3 times before you can finally leave the house. I remember once I was on a beautiful vacation, sitting by the ocean with a cold drink. And all I could think about was a small, constructive comment my boss had made a week earlier. That's the invisible alarm, a biological system that is constantly scanning the horizon for threats. It can feel like a curse, like you're carrying a heavy backpack that everyone else got to leave at home. But that alarm isn't there to hurt you. It's there because, evolutionarily, it kept your ancestors alive.
Neuroticism is the dimension of emotional stability, specifically your sensitivity to negative emotion. It is primarily managed by the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. High scores have an amygdala that is hypersensitive. It fires more easily and stays active longer. This trait is broken down into two subfacets: volatility and withdrawal. Volatility is the outward expression of stress, irritability, anger, or sudden shifts in mood. Withdrawal is the inward expression, anxiety, depression, and the tendency to retreat from challenges. While high neuroticism is associated with higher levels of stress, it is also linked to hypervigilance. High scorers are often the first to notice when a project is going off the rails or when a person is being untruthful. On the low end, you have stability. These individuals are calm under pressure and rarely ruminate. However, they can sometimes be blind to real dangers because their alarm system is set to low volume.
I remember the first time I saw my actual Big Five scores on a piece of paper. It wasn't a colorful badge that said I was a hero or a thinker. It was just a series of percentiles, raw numbers that felt strangely cold at first. But as I looked at my high score in openness and my low score in conscientiousness, suddenly, years of failing to keep a perfect planner made sense. I wasn't lazy. I was just trying to use a system built for a person with a completely different brain. I stopped trying to fix my personality and started negotiating with it. Instead of fighting my high neuroticism, I started asking my alarm system what it was trying to protect. That's the power of a map. It doesn't tell you where to go, but it tells you exactly where you're standing.
The biggest question people ask is, am I stuck with these scores forever? The answer is both yes and no, thanks to rank order stability and the maturity principle. As we age, most people naturally become more conscientious, more agreeable, and less neurotic. However, your rank compared to your peers usually stays the same. If you're the most extroverted person in the room at 20, you likely will be at 80. But there is a concept called free traits, coined by psychologist Brian Little. This is the ability to act out of character to serve a core personal project or a person you love. An introvert can give a world-class speech, and a disagreeable person can be a tender parent. The difference is that acting against your biological grain has a biogenic cost. It's exhausting. If you spend all day acting extroverted, you need restorative niches, quiet time to let your nervous system reset. Understanding your Big Five isn't about setting limits, it's about knowing when you'll need to recharge.
So, the next time you see a quiz promising to reveal your true self in 10 questions, maybe keep scrolling. You aren't a 4-letter code or a character archetype from a fantasy novel. You are a complex, biological interplay of 5 deep-seated dimensions. You are a unique mix of explorer, worker, socialite, peacemaker, and sentry. Accepting your scores isn't about giving up on growth. It's about finally having the right tools for the job. Stop looking for a box to fit into and start looking at the spectrum you're already on. Because when you stop trying to be a type, you finally have the space to be a human being.